From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group from our various locations around the country. Joining us this week are the regular faces of Pat Buchanan, Eleanor Clift and Clarence Page, and our guest this week is the conservative commentator and strategist Ryan Girdusky. Welcome, Ryan. On that note, we shall get to our first issue, which is issue 1, Trump's strategy.
Maybe that's a question you should ask China. Don't ask me, ask China that question, okay? When you ask them that question, you may get a very unusual answer.
President Trump this week responded fiercely to challenges that he views the coronavirus pandemic as a global competition for influence. More, that is, than he views it as a global health crisis. And as the death toll rises across the nation, Trump has adopted 2 key principles for his coronavirus strategy. First, blaming China over the global chaos. Second, pushing efforts to more quickly reopen the economy. Democrats disagree, with their officials again extending lockdowns.
Pat, how do you see the president's seeming frustration growing this week? I mean, what do you think is going on in the White House?
I think what is happening is the President of the United States is making one of the most critical decisions for this country in many a decade, and also it is a crucial decision for himself. He's under tremendous fire from his enemies in the press. This, in a way, is getting to him. I think the casualties and the deaths, while the curve is diminishing and the new cases are diminishing, I think there's no question about it that he believes that the thing he's got to do is to rescue the economy from a future depression, that he's doing the best he can with regard to the deaths and cases. And I think that is really coming to tell on him. But I do think this, you've got at one end of the spectrum, Dr. Fauci, who would virtually shut the country down still, and Trump, who would open it up. But the country is moving in Trump's direction, Tom. But gradually it is opening up, and we are taking a tremendous risk with having a second wave of this virus. But Trump is making that decision, and it tells upon him.
Well, I agree the president is taking a tremendous risk, but he keeps declaring victory. The footage you showed was from the Rose Garden press conference, where he basically said, we met the moment and we prevailed, suggesting that the coronavirus is somehow in the past. The event was to celebrate the testing that's available. And yet, at the same time that he wants to portray himself as giving Americans the tools to go out into the world safely, he is drawing battle lines, drawing a battle line with Dr. Fauci, who's the world's most respected epidemiologist, and a battle line over whether schools should open in the fall. And you already have part of the California school system saying they're not going to open their colleges in the fall. And you have grade school parents everywhere wondering what's going to happen. What we need are CDC guidelines that tell us how this can be done safely, and we need testing. There was a Senate hearing this week, the Health Committee. Lamar Alexander is the chairman, and he said later on Fox News that if he were a university president, he would plan on opening colleges in the fall.
Ryan, do you think that Pat is correct in identifying this movement? I mean, anecdotally, it does seem, certainly in Washington, that more people are out on the street in larger numbers, that perhaps people have said enough is enough, even if they don't admit it, and are acting in ways that would reflect this moving towards Trump's political favor. What say you?
Right. I think that there are people certainly, I mean, look, we know more now than we ever did before about the virus. We know that being outside, you have a less of a chance of getting it, like in an office. And you're seeing protests happen nationwide. It's not just in red states, and it's just not just among red state Republicans. I mean, you look at California, where they were protesting to allow them to go to the beach. And some of the more draconian laws in that state were saying, no, you can't even go to the beach. You can't go to a park. We're going to spy on you. You're having issues across the country with that. And you're also having blue state governors like the governor of Colorado starting to reopen the economy. Not to nearly as much media criticism as the governors of Georgia and Florida. And I think that it is inevitable that certain industries that are of low risk, maybe like drive-in movie theaters, if there are many in the country, or outdoor gardening companies that clean lawns, they have very little reason at this point to stay shut. And people under 50 are at lower risk than we originally thought. So I think that moving forward, people are looking to, one, go out for their own mental sanity, but also to go to work. I think people really miss working at this point.
Clarence.
Well, Brian, I think you've been reading my column, because I wrote last week about how I too and my family, a lot of people want to get back out on the street again. Just taking a trip across town for some kind of essential reason feels like a little holiday in Spain for a couple hours. But at the same time, though, what's interesting to me about the polling, for those of us who still believe in polls, show about Democrats are split about, Democrats overwhelmingly want to put safety ahead of fears for the economy. Republicans are about 50-50. And that seems to make sense just anecdotally, and certainly from what we can see demographically. A lot more Republicans who tend to live out in the outer suburbs or in rural areas where the threat isn't nearly as great. And you've also got a sense among a lot of Democrats who tend to be more inner city folks that they are in greater danger. So at the same time, though, like even in Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot is getting some heat from people who say, do we really need to shut down the beaches and shut down everything at all? People are getting antsy now, but there's still that danger, and we still see a mixed picture as far as places where we're seeing the movement more toward the safe zone, and those that are getting more of a red zone.
Let me talk to. I think Clarence is exactly right. I think on the polls where the country stands now, more people probably stand with being more conservative and with Dr. Fauci than Donald Trump. But here, Dr. Fauci is a scientist. He's a doctor, epidemiologist. He's not president of the United States. He's not responsible for the nation's health and security. He's not commander-in-chief. He's not chief of state. He's not head of a government. So I think in this battle with Dr. Fauci, who is an advisor and a wise one, Donald Trump is the decider. He's got to decide for the entire nation. In my view, politically, that when Trump decides now, he may be in the minority now. The trend is in Trump's direction, and by June 15th, I think you are not going to be able to get this country to go back in shutdown, even if there's a second wave.
Okay, Eleanor, concluding comment.
Dr. Fauci is not ordering anybody to do anything. He is very humble in the way he offers his opinion. I have noticed that among the Fox News contributors, they're basically saying, you praise Fauci to the sky and then you just ignore him. And I think that's what Trump is in the process of probably doing. But Fauci does command trust, and he has put the warnings out there. You know, the Spanish flu had one wave, and then the second and third waves were worse. That is what people are concerned about. Nobody is wishing for this. But if we're going to go forward, it would be nice to have the tools. The president says we are warriors in this war against the virus. Well, when you're a warrior, you get helmets, you get protective gear against IEDs, where we need the tests, we need the contact tracing. Let's see if they produce those 40 to 50 million tests. Let's see if they're enough. That's what we need to go forward. Nobody is arguing that you're going to keep the country shut down forever. That is a false, that's a straw man that people put up there. Everybody wants to get out and get back. But you have to do it in a way that people feel some measure of safety.
Okay. For my 2 cents coming in here, I think we should look closely at Sweden, which has a higher death rate than its neighboring Scandinavian countries, but seems to be moving towards herd immunity and consolidating those social and economic factors and other health factors, reduced stress, heart attacks, etc., that perhaps we're losing out on. Something to consider. Okay, issue 2, unmasking.
Former President Obama last week lamented the Justice Department decision to drop the case against former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. It was, Obama said, a, quote, threat to the rule of law, end quote. This week, Acting Director of National Intelligence Richard Grenell declassified the names of those who requested a so-called unmasking of Flynn's name in intelligence reports on his conversations with the then Russian ambassador. Among others, those listed include Joe Biden, former UN Ambassador Samantha Power, and the former CIA and FBI directors, John Brennan and James Comey.
Eleanor, this unmasking situation, Democrats say it's something that's just been essentially a Republican game. Republicans say it's a terrible affront to the nation's constitutional order. What say you?
The Republicans are using it to, again, divide and distract. I think most Americans probably have no idea what unmasking means. Basically, that is when an American citizen is caught in an intercept of a phone conversation with foreigners, and their identity is protected in the transcript that comes out of that. White House and national security officials routinely ask to have those names unmasked so they can see who it is. The former DNI director was on television this morning, actually, and he said he would ask for somebody to be unmasked virtually every day. It is not unusual. You don't know who it is, and as it turns out, General Flynn turned up in a number of these conversations. President Obama was so wary of Flynn that the one piece of advice he gave to President Trump during the transition was do not hire General Flynn, because he had a lot of contacts with Russians and it seemed to have some nefarious business dealings.
All right, let's bring in Pat.
Well, listen, they got everybody but the doorman in the White House was demanding to know who was on that call to the Russian ambassador. Look, you got a dozen or more people in the White House that is shutting down in 2 weeks, and they're looking for the name of the individual on it. The FBI, Comey, had sent 2 agents over to Flynn to set him up and make him say something that either gets him indicted for the Logan Act or that gets him indicted for telling a lie about what the FBI had already on a tape. Look, this whole thing is part of a design, a broader design. You can get Papadopoulos, you can get Carter Page in there, you get the Mueller report into that dossier. All of this was designed to damage and cripple and destroy the Trump candidacy and the Trump presidency before it began, and more is coming out.
Clarence, why do you think that the White House, the Obama White House, these officials, Vice President Biden, for example, were so interested in getting access to this information when they were going to leave office within 2 weeks anyway? Surely that undermines the succession to, the peaceful transfer of power.
So first of all, let's point out that the president and the vice president certainly had the legal authority to do this. I point that out because some of the coverage of this controversy make it sound like they did something illegal. And they did not, but it does feed the passions of the paranoids out there who suspect anybody from the opposition party, whoever their opposition party is engaged in some kind of espionage against U.S. citizens. But Flynn's activities were suspicious, I think, just on the face of them. What was he doing out there? Is the Trump administration trying to practice foreign policy among themselves without letting the rest of the world in on it? There were reasons to be suspicious. And so I don't find that to be odd. What I do find odd is that Flynn finally confessed to perjury, double, two counts here, and then he gets let off by a judge, although now it looks like that may be reviewed. But there's enough suspicions to go around in this case.
Okay. Well, the Obama administration had put sanctions on Russia, and Flynn was basically talking to the Russians while Obama was still president about, we'll get back to us later about that. I mean, that's overstepping what he.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. As the incoming national security advisor for the next president, he had every right to speak to Ambassador Kilsiak. The bigger question is yes, there's no law breaking on unmasking on a citizen. He did nothing illegal with that. How did David Ignatius from the Washington Post get that story before it was public information? Who was leaking to press outlets constantly? The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Guardian in the UK all had this story while it was classified information. That is the crime. Who was leaking classified information to the media to stain the Trump presidency before it began? And also,
who's being charged with that, Ryan? Yeah. Who's being charged with that crime?
No one yet. But it's got. But there's more coming out.
Well, Ryan, where we're headed, Clarence. Let us walk down that road together.
Great prediction, Pat.
Pat, let me ask you a question here.
Sure.
Obviously the Republican right is concerned about this situation. There's a lot of sort of movement to try and find out who did leak that information. Of course, you know this, we know this. The best way, frankly, the only way in some sense that we could find that out is for Mr. Ignatius's telecommunications records to become in the property of the FBI. Isn't there a civil liberties case to be said that it's better to let this pass?
Well, look, I mean, there's a right, obviously a First Amendment right of Mr. Ignatius, but at the same time, you ought to sit down John Brennan, you ought to sit down Mr. Clapper, ask these individuals if they talk to him, but keep this investigation going. If what was going on was a really wonderful thing, why doesn't Ignatius and these folks come forward and say these fellows were really serving the country when they brought down General
Obama
Flynn?
hasn't been president for the last 4 years. You're really going to run a re-election campaign on Obama committing crimes, which
it's not about a re-election campaign.
Everything is about the re-election campaign. I don't think anybody's going to argue on that.
No, listen, but it's the matter of fact that Michael Flynn was the incoming national security advisor. He had every right to make the phone calls he made. And the fact that the FBI sat there and in their transcripts were trying to get him to lie. They were talking about getting him to lie. That is outrageous.
All right, we have to
do that on his own, actually.
Okay. All right.
You need the help of the FBI.
My 2 cents here. I don't know why Mr. Flynn didn't anticipate that certain Americans would be listening to the Russian ambassador's calls. Anyway, we will go on to issue 3, which is special elections.
Republicans celebrated this week as Mike Garcia took California's 25th House Congressional District. Garcia's victory unseats incumbent Democrat Christy Smith. Smith had replaced Katie Hill following the latter's office scandal last year. But that wasn't the week's only cause for GOP glee. In Wisconsin, Tom Tiffany also secured election. It's not all smooth sailing for the red team, however. Recent polls suggest that Joe Biden continues to expand his lead over President Trump.
Clarence, do you think Republicans have scored a pretty significant win here that bodes well for them in November, or is this in a microcosm?
Well, it's kind of an off-year microcosm, you could say, Tom, because this isn't a regularly scheduled quadrennial election like in November or the midterm election that elected Katie Hill out in California. The Democrats in California weren't really ready to be electing a new congressperson. We're expecting Katie Hill to have to resign in a bit of a photo scandal. In Wisconsin, they had a similar situation here where the Republican did pull it off, and it looks very good for the party. They gained 2 seats, but I don't think it's that significant for November. What's interesting too is that the Vice President Biden, he has still been campaigning from the basement, as Pat reminds us every week. But at the same time, he's holding steady in the polls, which indicates he's still got somehow momentum without moving.
All right, let me bring in Ryan here because you're very good on these issues, Ryan. How do you see these races?
Well, the Tiffany race in Wisconsin was Trump won that seat by 21.6 points, and Tiffany won it by 15.7. So it was basically a Republican seat to lose, and they won it. With Garcia's seat, it was very interesting because in California, the early ballots that come in, usually Republicans hold a lead, and then they lose election day voting and any voting that comes in afterwards. The interesting thing was Garcia not only won the early ballots, he won day of election voting in Los Angeles. His campaign was monumental. This is a seat that Hillary won by 6.7, and he won by 12. If you want to take that to a national level, now most times special elections don't have national trends. I worked for Bob Turner. We won the Anthony Weiner seat, and then Obama was reelected a year later. Most of the time, they don't have any national inclinings. The only time that this may have a national repercussion is the fact that Garcia did very, very well in some majority Hispanic precincts. And you're looking at the Biden campaign now, spending $55 million trying to win over Hispanic men. There is clearly, if you look at almost every poll, Trump is edging towards the high 30s, low 40s with the Hispanic voters, especially Hispanic men. And you're seeing the recent Las Vegas, Nevada independent poll showing it nearly a tie between Biden and Trump. If Trump is having a surge, it's partially because he's winning over more Hispanic voters. Where he's having a deficit, however, is because he's losing senior citizens since the coronavirus and his handling of the coronavirus.
Eleanor.
I think he's losing senior citizens because they figured out that he doesn't really have their best interests at heart. But the California election, I want to point out, does have warning signs for the Democrats, because the Democrats have been really campaigning for universal mail-in votes, and Donald Trump doesn't want it, says that last time a Republican would get elected. Well, there was mail-in was basically what the election in California was about, and the Republicans did much better. The Democrats had a hard time energizing young, more loosely affiliated voters, part of the Obama coalition. They didn't turn out. So that I think it raises the question of whether is mail-in voters may not be the savior for the Democrats in November. They've got to do a lot more to energize their base.
And Pat, you know, we do talk about Biden in the basement, but the polls suggest, yes, it's early, and yes, everything can change, and yes, there are probably silent Trump voters, but he seems to be growing his lead on the president.
No, I don't think so. He's not growing his lead. What is happening is clearly Trump is down from his 49% when he began the battle with the coronavirus down to 41 or 42%, and Biden simply happens to be on the other side. The problem for Biden, and it's not, he says he's going to stay in the basement, which is a good strategy because he's doing fine sitting there and doing nothing and not being seen. But the problem comes when he comes out and when he has to face the public and when he has to face Trump and when he has to campaign. And so I think he hasn't overcome that, and he hasn't overcome that deficit he's got in his ability to communicate thoughts and ideas and issues and words.
All right,
and these things are.
And you're saying that Trump has an ability to do all those things?
I think it's slightly better.
Yes, Trump, yes, he can tell us to inject Lysol into our veins, and he can say really horrendous things about his enemies, but he's not an inspirational leader, which is what this country wants.
To a lot of working class people, he is.
Excuse me, please. I think, you know, Joe Biden will not be in the basement forever, and you can keep questioning his energy level and
He'll come get him soon.
And set those expectations as low as you want, because I think he'll exceed them.
I think the most important thing that's coming out of polls right now is when they ask them, who do you trust on certain issues? On the issue of healthcare, Americans overwhelmingly trust Joe Biden. But on the issue of the economy, even despite the high unemployment rating, Americans still believe Donald Trump will be better than Joe Biden. So the question is, what will be the question in November people will be voting for? Healthcare or the economy? If it's the economy, Trump has an edge.
Concluding comment,
Clarence. Are better off today than we were 4 years ago.
Clarence, concluding comment.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When I was growing up, everybody thought the Republicans were the party to go to for the economy. But let's face it, the last big economic failures we've seen were under Republicans, the Bushes, and then Trump, or excuse me. With Trump, of course, the coronavirus came in. And with Obama and Clinton, we saw a lot more money coming into the government than going out. So we have a situation now in which the election's still 6 months away. Anything can happen.
Okay, my 2 cents on the Garcia race. I think it's an opportunity there for Republicans to perhaps look beyond the Trump immigration rhetoric to mobilizing Hispanic Americans under those shared values of faith, the Roman Catholic Church, and personal responsibility. Hard work pays off. On your bike, as Norman Tebbit said. All right, predictions, Pat.
My prediction is this, kind of grim. I do think we're going to get something of a second wave. Everybody, Europe and the states of the Union, and even the liberal states in this country, Democratic states, blue states, are opening up. And I think we're going to get that second wave. I do not believe the country or Europe or the continent, I don't think they're going to shut down again to the degree they have. And so we're going to have a very exciting event.
Okay, Eleanor.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell did an extraordinary thing this week. He basically called on the Congress to give more relief to the economy. I mean, he's in charge of monetary policy, not fiscal policy. So stepping into this, what has become a standoff between the Democrats and the Republicans, with the Democrats offering a $3 trillion heroes package. And even I rolled my eyes at that. but it is needed. And Jerome Powell basically said, you know, we're at war. This is, he didn't say this, this is his thinking, I believe. This is like 1942, basically.
Okay.
You spend what it takes, and this economy is going to take a lot. So
Okay.
that's going to help push another round of spending to help cities and states.
Ryan.
Boris Johnson has been empowering China hawks in his cabinet and inside the British Parliament. I believe that you're going to see a hard decoupling coming from China and the UK after the coronavirus dies down a bit in that country.
Okay, Clarence.
President Trump announced by Twitter a new scandal, the hashtag Obamagate, and then hasn't told us what it is or what did Obama do wrong. And he's just dodged it with a big grin on his face, but still conservative media in particular have been chattering about it like crazy. My prediction is I don't think we ever will find out what Obamagate is because it doesn't exist.
Okay, I'll have two little predictions here. Number one, but based on Clarence's comment, I think it would be a mistake for President Trump. I think he's mistaken in his hope that Barack Obama should testify on the Obamagate. I think President Obama would do a much better job than President Trump anticipates there. And secondly, in contrast to Eleanor, I predict that as much as we need new stimulus, 3 trillion is a number too high because it would send us to that debt to GDP ratio that really brings into question the validity of American treasuries. Anyway, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.